Hello and welcome to Property Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Zalkin. Today I'm here with Alex Gampel of Cuby Technologies. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob. Happy to be here. Excited to spread the love.
Absolutely. Alex, please tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, no worries. Well, let's start with our mission. Our mission is pretty broad. It's to empower others to build a better physical world. And our vision is to deploy mobile microfactories globally to solve challenges within the construction industry. So simply put, we build hardware and software to basically solve around skilled labor shortages that exist in the construction industry. So we're trying to make the industry a bit more efficient. Our product is a mobile microfactory for last mile construction.
Alex, what inspired you to create this company? It's a really out of the box approach to construction and home building. What was sort of the genesis of this?
Yeah, and I think most of the credit goes to my co-founder, who's a brilliant engineer and a third-time deep tech founder. But I I personally come from a real estate background, so most of my career has been like yours in real estate development and private equity. And I was firsthand seeing the lack of skilled labor, or really the aging demographics around physical construction workers on site. And I started looking for interesting ways to develop, or ways that could make me a better developer from a hardware perspective. And I was running into deploying existing venture backed models and technologies on certain projects I was working on in the development space. And as I was interviewing folks to potentially deploy, I was introduced to my co founder, who I instantly saw an opportunity behind some of the research he was doing to do a form of industrialized construction in a more efficient, practical, cost effective way. And that's how Cuby was born.
That's great. So explain your end customer. It's not necessarily the home buyer, but it's real estate developers, correct?
Yes. So I think a lot of times in the industry, it's very easy to say that folks are going to disrupt, which is a word I don't love, but folks are going to disrupt the existing incumbent, that incumbent even being a general contractor or a developer. But the truth is, if you look at some of these national developers like home builders, the Lennars, the D.R. Hortons of the world, or if you look at massive general contractors like the Bechtels or Turners, I think it's very hard to disrupt the gorilla in the room. So we never wanted to be the player that tries to tackle existing incumbents. We wanted to empower them. As such, we've built a solution that is something they could use and deploy today. And I think what you said is right. We're not trying to be a direct to consumer home sales model or developer or um, anything that really touches the end consumer. We want to be a solution for developers that build single family homes. And that's a starting point for us, because it's a massive part of the market that's undersupplied, but eventually other asset classes. So we'll go and deploy our mobile microfactories, hopefully by the hundreds very soon, and partner with regional folks. It could be operating partners that are GCs, developers, home builders, private equity groups. But the idea is that within a 300-mile radius, there is a home builder that's coming to the factory and saying, gee, you're building cheaper and faster than I am today, and you're a full turnkey solution. So now I could be best at what I am best at, which is marketing and sales, as opposed to the actual GC construction process, which is a low margin headache for most folks.
So you would say that your value proposition is cost and quality and time? Is that, or
Yeah,
is
and
there
I
another take on it?
repeatable quality, I think general quality, efficiency, cost, most importantly, time, importantly. But I think a lot of folks in the space to date, and there's a gamut of solutions that exist in industrialized construction, from modular to prefab to 3D printing. No one to date has been cost effective. And you being a developer, I think you're the exact demographic of folks that will say, gee, I love your engineered solution. It's so fun and complicated, but costs, they're more than what they are today for me. I'm not using that solution. It's all about yield on cost for you. So we try to really tackle the problem not from an end product change, meaning same single family home as done today, same materials for the most part. Let's change the process and the mechanism through which you deliver that single family home. So for us, it was about cost day one, not in the future. And we're now successfully starting to build at sub $100 a foot all in.
And what about the cost to construct the facility? At what point does it make economic sense? Is there a certain threshold, a certain number of homes, or walk us a
It's a
little
good
bit through the
question.
numbers?
So there's two trains of thought. There's someone like you that has 1,500 lots at some point, right?
Hmm.
And you will buy a facility or partner on a facility to execute that phased project. And that's more than enough to fill demand for the next several years. But then there's also thought architecture around, let's call them, Zalkin family office that wants to launch a manufacturing facility. You don't have to necessarily eat your own supply. You can then essentially market out that supply to within the 300-mile radius. There's Bob Smith, the home builder that's building 15 homes a year that is going to the factory. So you don't have to buy it to then worry about just servicing it yourself. And really, the folks we're targeting, I recently heard a term called the magnificent middle. So there's the top 10 production home builders, and then there's like everyone else, and they really fall in that magnificent middle, which are local home builders that do 100, 50, 200 single family homes a year. But to answer the second part of your question, part of our innovation is the ability to make this factory entirely ourselves. So the designing it, manufacturing it, testing it, et cetera, we do all in house. So it allows us to launch factories, our mobile micro factories, all in for $6.5 million. Really, the total cost is 10 because we also capitalize certain shortfall or certain working capital to get it from 0 to 60. But 10 million all in for it to become operational. Once it's operational, it's doing about 430,000 square feet of output. Let's assume that average American home is 2,300 square feet, so maximum around 188 single family homes a year. Fully turnkey from foundation to interior finish, with the labor in the mobile microfactory also putting together the kit of parts on site nearby.
And what's the lifespan of a factory? Are we talking, 5 years, 10 years, or could it really go on for many, many more than that?
It can go on infinitely as long as you're
Right.
servicing it and
Sure.
holding enough capex reserve to eventually replace machines, etc. We call them mobile microfactories not because they're meant to move every month or every year. We call
Hmm.
them mobile microfactories because they are in fact mobile and micro, but really it's because for our software, where there's quite a bit of software for the processes both offsite and on-site, for it to sit on top of a repeatable process, part of that repeatable process needs to be the same blueprint each time for the factory floor and what's around the factory and what happens on site. So when we say mobile microfactory, it's because it's the same thing, copy and pasted each time in different regions, erected very quickly on, say, a rented parking lot, because it's a containerized solution. So in that sense, it's a mobile microfactory. It could theoretically move every year if you wanted to. There's a cost to it. But the idea is that it's servicing a 300-mile radius, where in the US, right, there's 4 to 7 million home shortage. You pick a dot anywhere in the map, you're likely doing more than 150 homes a year.
Yeah.
Pick a market like Michigan, there's, even though it's a declining market, there's 10,000 homes built and absorbed over the last 2 years per year. So we just need to be 150 of that 10,000 to do extremely well.
How many square feet is one of your factories, your facilities?
It's about 30,000 square feet, and it will sit on about 3 acres of land. So we typically will go rent a parking lot or say like an abandoned airfield,
Hmm.
um, almost like a covered land play for a lot of folks.
And what about the staffing? Are you implementing robotics or other technologies to cut down on the labor inside the factory?
So let me preface by saying that the entire bane of our existence is around one KPI. That KPI is the amount of output we can generate out of a single fixed mobile microfactory over the required skilled labor to put that square feet together and to produce that kit of parts. So it's all about reducing skilled labor in short, because there's a major skilled labor shortage that exists in the US. So how do we move from skilled labor to unskilled, and then how do we reduce the amount of hours needed altogether? So robotics is a tricky one. I think Elon Musk said it best. If you start with robotics too early, you might be going in the wrong direction. It's first about squeezing as much human efficiency as you possibly can by way of lean manufacturing. Then once you've squeezed that human efficiency to a maximum capacity, robotics is the right move. At this point, the only thing that we've roboticized are certain welding elements of our helical piers and certain framing elements, et cetera, because we use steel frames for single family homes. The rest is all about unskilled labor and how do you make that unskilled labor incredibly efficient.
You brought up a ton of interesting stuff I'd like to talk about. One of them are the components of the house, and you had mentioned steel. I'd imagine there is a lot more efficiency when you're building under a roof versus on the field. And I'd love to hear a little
So
bit
for us,
more.
it's actually both, and it's ironic. So
Oh,
a
okay.
lot of folks, when they say offsite construction or industrialized construction, ironically, you step foot in a lot of facilities of other players, and there's not real lean manufacturing happening. It's that same skilled labor that's swinging a hammer and now just not getting rained on. For us, offset and onsite are almost interchangeable because A, proximity of
Hmm.
the mobile microfactory to construction sites, but B, half of our cost of our factory are certain elements of the factory that physically make their way onto the construction site. There's certain IP around that, so I won't go into it, but let's just say that our lean manufacturing doesn't just end at the construction site. Then there's, part C, which is about variables of innovating within IBC compliance, right? There's, unlike the space industry, when you innovate in real estate, there's certain parameters. Those parameters are Uncle Sam telling you what and how you could build and what materials you can use. So it's not an infinite innovation cycle, it's within a box. So the material selection of what goes into our homes is widely available materials for two reasons. One, we don't want any regulatory hurdles around TCOing and inspectors. Two, because we can plug the factories in a distributed way where there's a network globally, they need to plug somewhere where existing supply chain can quickly be accessed. So we use widely available materials. Theoretically, everything that goes into our home can be bought at Home Depot. What we do inside the mobile microfactory is one of three things. One, we make something from scratch when you talk about those kit of parts. Think a window entirely from scratch, or a SIP panel, or helical piers. Two, we're simply taking materials and we're prepping them. Think sheetrock for the walls. Think PEX pipes for the plumbing or pre-cutting electrical wiring, etc. So there's things we prep, and there's things that we don't even touch, but they still channel our way through our supply chain, which is cabinetry finish, facades, interior finishes, toilets. But those things still make their way, formed into a pack that gets sent to the site and then put together. And the important thing is we try not to pre-clad everything. So in some prefab modular elements, they pre-clad, say, mechanical elements behind the walls, etc. You need national certification for that, which we do not, because our kit of parts gets put together on site, which is very important.
Got it. What are some of the challenges that you're currently solving for right now with the process? What are some of your things that you'd like to accomplish or solve for within the next, 12 months or so?
I think for us, day one focus has always been less about the end product, which is building a home or
Mhm.
launching one facility. It's always been building about the machine, the system to make a bunch of factories. So a lot of software is complicated, but it's also building the system that builds the system. I don't know any other way of putting it, but it's really, we need to get to about 20 factories per year in terms of manufacturing capacity, and that requires quite a lot of SOPs, standard operating procedures to set up. So like not only are we building processes around building a single family home and then other building archetypes, but it's process around building our own factories and then setting them up. So I'd say that's, always a challenge and one we're likely going to overcome pretty soon.
That's the approach that you're taking is so novel. I really haven't seen it even come close elsewhere in the industry. Um, with regards to the home architecture and style, are these floor plans and designs that you are putting together internally, or is this
No. So we're not fixed or constrained by, say, here's Model T, like the Ford Model
right?
T, and it's only this color, right? So it's kind of tough because as much as you want to make the analogy of industrialized construction to the car manufacturing industry in the 1950s and whatnot, and it's very tough to do so because the car manufacturing industry, they have a repeatable product each time, repeatable machines that create that repeatable product. Unfortunately, here, I think the limitation historically of industrialized construction is that there's very little customization, right? Volumetric boxes specifically because they're binary to a developer. Can Robert Zal can use them or not for his project? What we're doing is we're building a standard kit of parts, and then putting that kit of parts, you ultimately create hundreds of permutations, both
Yeah.
layouts, sizes, shapes, finishes, etc. So the goal is it's always going to be less constrained. It's always going to be more constrained than typical construction, just because therein is the flaw of construction, that it's a one-off project every time, even if you have two of the same building. There's going to be a limitation, but we're trying to make that limitation not constrained to customization. So most of the times developers bring us their plans and they say, hey, can you do this? And the answer is yes, we can back into it with our system.
In what are some of the challenges that you're facing just in general of launching a new company? I mean, this is a 2-year-old company, correct? Or
3.5 years now.
3.5 years.
We've been
So
at
it's
this.
fairly new. Tell me a little bit about the growing pains that you're experiencing and what it's like to be a co-founder of a startup.
It's like physics. Everything that can go wrong usually goes wrong, I think. But I think for us, the challenge, and there's some tailwinds also that mitigate that challenge. The challenge is that we fall into a category of businesses that are called deep tech. I don't know if there's a universal definition of deep tech. The way I categorize deep tech is really hard stuff. Okay. That's typically venture that's backing very hard stuff that doesn't have a linear outcome, but it is generally binary. Either there's a big enough created moat that that business becomes extremely just out of the park successful, or it goes to zero. Part of what we're working on is a vertically integrated solution, and it's massive at scale, and the vision is massive. That just takes a lot of engineering hours to figure out and get to commercialization, which we're getting pretty close to, and we've done in a very capital efficient manner, mostly because we arbitrage a lot of Eastern European engineering talent, given my co-founder's previous background out of Eastern Europe. And I think some of the mitigants to some things that are this hard, this capital intensive, and take this long is the fact that the US is finally back, especially venture, to backing really difficult problems, as opposed to, say, direct to consumer companies or another app. They're back to being excited about very challenging big swings. And I think there's no bigger swing than solving around the undersupply of housing that we have in the US, which is an incredibly critical point.
Speaking of opportunities, where do you see the most opportunity? I mean, is one day the vision to scale outside of the United States, or where do you hope to grow the company?
So I think we have a day one global vision. So we're agnostic. The way we've built the business and the way we launch these mobile microfactories is you can approach us from any part of the world and we'll ship you the factory there and set it up there. It's agnostic from a global perspective. But the goal is to have about 100 mobile microfactories across the US. So at 100 mobile microfactories times 200 homes a year, we're doing about 20,000 homes a year. In a much more efficient manner. With time, we'll also scale up production. These factories will become more efficient. Costs will continue to drive down. But when you ask us about the opportunity and the goal, my partner Oleg and I, we hope to be sitting in a command center one day and seeing live what hundreds of these factories are outputting any given process at any given time. There's a lot of variables happening at once. That's kind of the vision.
Have you noticed any trends in the construction industry that you think, wow, this is a trend that we're going to see a lot more of this? For example, sustainability is something being thrown around a lot. It sounds like your solution is very sustainable in terms of, just being a lot more efficient with time and materials. What other trends, or maybe it's even more about sustainability, that you can share with us?
So our biggest investor is an amazing fund called Out1 Ventures. Their focus is on climate tech predominantly, the intersection of deep tech and climate tech, really. We don't ever talk about or lead with the climate angle because we think it should just be a byproduct of what we do. From a climate perspective, construction is the biggest polluter, mostly related to waste, a lot of rework and a lot of guesswork, right? And you're in the space, so you kind of know construction sites, there's so much trash, right? Just physically, it's insane.
Unbelievable.
I
Yeah.
forgot the exact stat, so I don't want to be held responsible, but a very meaningful percentage of landfills are filled with construction waste. Because, and this is the second trend that I'll get into, we're seeing in the industry, because folks, including us, can now digital twin model an entire project, meaning they could produce, a parametric version of it online, one for one, knowing which part goes into it, there's no longer waste. You're kind of saying, I'm producing the X that I need and the X that will be on the site. So you reduce quite a bit of waste there. Um, I think the other trends that we're seeing is developers, I think, are and home builders are open to adoption of new technologies, given that margins continue to be squeezed because of interest rates. So I think folks are all about finding efficiencies and now trying to solve for the long term as well. Um, so I think that's a positive.
Are there any home trends in particular? For example, anything about the design or aspects, of a home, smart technology that you're seeing, being adapted more and more?
I think because we're not a D2C solution, we're really we're really at the whim of what folks are telling us to build in their market with our factories. But like everything from I think personally what I'm seeing, I think because of climate change, a lot of folks talk about climate, you know, basically efficient climate, ESG driven narratives around homes. I think what folks are forgetting to talk about is climate resistant homes as well, as
Right.
insurance premiums massively increase due to climate risk, whether it's in Florida or wildfires in California, right? Florida hurricanes and floods and whatnot. I think folks are forgetting to talk about certain materials we can use to build more sturdy homes and more efficient homes relative to natural disasters and whatnot.
You had mentioned a little bit earlier about your cost of construction currently. Is there a goal? Is there a certain magic number that you are striving to achieve in terms of delivering a finished home? I'm sure it must be on your mind.
So we want to go to market now with about $100 a foot all in. You being in the industry, you obviously know that's a great number to be at,
Great number.
especially the quality of home we're trying to produce as a standard. Um, a lot of times when folks claim these numbers, everyone's speaking apples and oranges because it's like, what are you including in your number? What
Right.
is that finished product,
Does it
etc.
include the garage? Right.
Yeah, all the square footage, set, yeah, etc. So we're trying to be about $100 a foot all in, meaning from foundation to interior finish, move and ready, at about $100 a foot. With time, of course, there's this conversation of economies of scale and certain supply chains that will have mass effect on that will keep reducing that cost through systems of Kaizen, right? Constant improvement and whatnot.
Yeah.
So
Do you ever see your company being one of the suppliers to the factories, or is that just sort of an area that you? Oh, you do. Okay.
we have we don't ever want to lead with that because the whole point is launch a factory anywhere and tap into local supply chain. That's important.
Right.
With time, we see an opportunity, and we have a couple of visions for what 5 to 7 years out looks like. That includes us launching our own home building arm, hopefully. So a brand, which takes a piece of each factory potentially and makes a couple homes in a region just because we eventually think we have some consumer acumen. And two, uh, part of that future plan is also to potentially procure at scale materials that feed into the factory. If we can access supply chains globally, say from China, potential to buy steel or certain facade finishes, tap into certain US economies elsewhere, etc.
Tell me a little bit more about your 5 and 10 year plan. Love to hear sort of what the aspiration is. What does your company look like, 5, 10 years from now?
I think, again, it's continuously driving down that one KPI that we have, which is maximizing output for these mobile microfactories and reducing the skilled labor required to build homes. Um, I think that's the one metric we'll continue to focus on, and we've really thought hard about it. And how does that metric scale with time? And it's just trying to replicate as many of these mobile microfactories as we can globally.
In terms of current projects that you're working on or that's on the horizon, what are you most excited about? There must be one or two projects right now that you're very excited about. Love to hear some specifics.
So, just to contextualize everything, we're at about 310,000 engineering hours as a business. It's quite a lot of engineering
That's
hours.
a
And
lot.
that's when I say deep tech takes a while, it takes a while before you feel comfortable enough to launch with partners. So, what we've done to this point is built a mobile microfactory ourselves. we've now kind of stamped it and said, this is the one we're replicating for the next, say, 50 times.
Where is
Maybe
this
not 50,
factory currently?
it's in Eastern Europe. And then
Okay.
now we're starting to sign contracts with partners because our model is to partner with local folks when we launch factories. The one I'm allowed to talk about that I'm pretty excited about is in Detroit, mainly because of the history of Detroit, right? And this whole idea of bringing it full circle and manufacturing back in Detroit and onshoring, it's an interesting opportunity, I think.
And who is behind that project?
So I'll give you the archetype of the group. So it is a regional general contractor that is hedging what they're seeing on their own construction sites, which is a very aging demographic.
I'm excited to see what comes out. Do you know how many homes they plan on building?
So they themselves are not going to be the builder. They're the case study of, hey, we want a factory. We know we can run this thing with your help, of course, us, our help. But
Got
we're
it.
going to sell to the local ecosystem. So Bob Smith, the builder that's building 20 single family homes around Detroit, he's or she is then the customer of.
Sure. It makes total sense. And do you have any other planned factories, or anything in the works? I'd imagine there's a pipeline of some other exciting
The,
locations.
there's quite a few folks that are ready to that are getting in line and excited, but we're kind of not at a point where we can roll, say, 8 factories out at the same
Sure.
time. We got to test the kinks and kind of work through some things. But I'd say other exciting markets on the horizon: New Mexico, Texas, Florida. So those are just some, and then we have a couple international locations that we're targeting as well. Um, so we'll
Eh,
talk about those when they're a bit further along.
Sure. And how are people finding out about your company? Are they reaching out to you directly? Are they reading news articles? How do you get inbound inquiries?
Yeah, to be honest, we haven't really, we don't have a business development cycle right now because we're not at a point, like I said, to take in a bunch of demand because then it'll go to waste in a sense. But we do get a bunch of inbound, and I think it's mostly because what we're doing is a little bit unique. So there's that X factor, I think. But it's a combination of folks reaching out directly, or they've heard through someone, or there's folks like there's an amazing publication called the Builders Daily that recently wrote about us. They cover mostly home building. Um, so different channels, and they're kind of random, to be honest.
Uh, in terms of, personal inspirations, books, podcasts, would love to hear about, where you draw ideas from.
I think I'm one of those people that scour and find the most random things on the internet. So there's no specific thing, but podcasts I've been really liking lately. There's one that I really like called Heavy Hitters. I don't know if it's for your audience specifically, but it's a guy by the name of Ty Fidley who runs Iron Spring Ventures, which is a deep tech VC, and he does a podcast interviewing either heavy hitters in the industrial slash deep tech sectors or founders in that space. And I find that quite interesting. I think that's a good one.
For speaking with investors and meeting with folks that you want to bring aboard your company as partners, what do you look for? What makes a good partner?
So actually, this is a better position question to my partner, Oleg. He wrote a book about specifically this, and he compares physics and vectors in physics. So trying to find vector alignment with someone. Um, so we make a lot of our decisions that way, but I think for partners, more specifically investors, I think there's a ton of capital out there. Businesses like ours take 15 years if done right. So it's important who sits in your cap table and who you have alignment with. So we're pretty selective. The partners we have to date, like Tom Chi and his team at At1, are fantastic, and they're a great example of what a partner should be. But it's really someone that shares the long-term vision. And I think you should look for folks that you feel comfortable having dinner with when things aren't going well, not when things are going well.
Well said. Any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to share that maybe we didn't cover?
No, I think good. I think it just, hopefully you find folks that, want to be customers like you want to be a customer. So we're excited to keep talking to folks and get these things up and running.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed this conversation and our time together. Thank you so much for coming on. Truly appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we're paused.